heading straight for the U.S. base. Within minutes, alarms screamed across the compound. Soldiers scrambled from their bunks. The target was clear: the fuel depot, the heart of the base. If it went up, jets could not fly, and the base could not fight. The sky glowed red as the first explosions tore through the darkness. This was no drill. This was war. Stay with us until the end, because what happened after this strike changed everything. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. The strike at 4:15 a.m. did not come out of nowhere. It was the result of months of rising tension between the United States and Iran across the Middle East. The region has always been a fault line for conflict. Oil, religion, politics, and military power all collide there. For decades, Iran has looked for ways to push back against U.S. dominance. Washington, in turn, has relied on forward bases, carrier groups, and air power to keep control. The drone attack on the U.S. base was another chapter in that long story. The U.S. base in question sat in a desert area close to vital shipping lanes. Though the exact location was not made public, it was known to be one of the largest fuel storage points in the region. Thousands of barrels of jet fuel were kept there, ready to supply U.S. Navy and Air Force operations. The depot was more than just fuel tanks. It was the beating heart of logistics, making sure aircraft could take off at any moment and warships at sea could be supplied with speed. In military terms, it was a critical node. To Iran, it was a soft target worth striking. Iran's leadership understood that they could not win in a direct fight with the U.S. Navy or Air Force. America's aircraft carriers, stealth bombers, and submarines are unmatched. Instead, Tehran leaned into an asymmetric strategy. That means using cheaper, smaller, and faster weapons to hit expensive American assets. One of the most effective tools in this playbook has been drones. They're low-cost, easy to launch, and hard to stop. $20,000 drone can force a $3 million missile to be fired in defense. That trade is always in Iran's favor. This tactic was not new. In 2019, a swarm of drones and cruise missiles struck Saudi Arabia's Abqaiq oil facility. That attack cut global oil supply by almost 6% in a single day. It proved that drones could bypass modern air defense systems and still land devastating blows. Iran learned from that strike and refined its methods. Over time, they built a growing arsenal of unmanned systems. The Shahed 136 drone became one of their most notorious weapons. It was cheap, deadly, and exportable. In recent years, Iran also began arming its proxies with the same technology. Groups in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen received training and equipment. This blurred the line of responsibility. If a drone strike hit a U.S. target, was it Iran itself or a militia acting on Iran's orders? This made retaliation complicated. Washington had to balance between showing strength and avoiding a wider regional war. In the weeks leading up to the 4:15 a.m. strike, U.S. intelligence had noticed unusual drone activity inside Iran. Satellite images showed launch sites being prepared. Signals intercepts suggested new orders being passed to regional proxies. Some analysts warned that a strike was imminent, but the Middle East is always tense. Warnings come often, and not all of them turn into action. Commanders kept their defenses on alert, but life on the base carried on as usual. At night, the base looked calm from above. Rows of storage tanks shimmered under floodlights. Air crews slept in barracks. Pilots rested before early sorties. Security patrols circled the fences. Radar stations scanned the horizon. Yet despite all the technology, the vast desert around the base made it hard to detect every threat. Drones, especially when flown low, were difficult to track until they were close. The defenders knew this. They had drilled for it, but drills are never the same as the real thing. For Iran, the timing of the strike mattered. By hitting at night, they reduced visibility. By launching at 4:15 a.m., they targeted the moment when human fatigue was highest. Shift changes, tired operators, and soldiers asleep in their bunksall made the base vulnerable. The fuel depot, sitting in the open desert, was a perfect target. Even a few drones broke through. The result would be catastrophic. Geopolitically, Iran's leaders saw this as a test. Could they damage U.S. assets without drawing a massive retaliation? Could they show strength to their domestic audience while sending a warning to Washington? Each side was locked in a shadow game of pressure and response. Drone warfare had become the weapon of choice. The U.S. military understood the stakes. A base without fuel was like a fighter jet without wings. It meant grounded aircraft, delayed missions, and weaker control of the skies. In modern war, fuel is not just liquid, it is power itself. Protecting it was a top priority. And yet on that night, 21 Iranian drones were already inbound. They were minutes away from changing the balance, if only for a moment. The stage was set. The warning signs had been there. But nothing could prepare the base for the chaos that was about to unfold. At exactly 4:15 a.m., the silence of the desert was broken. Inside the radar control room, operators spotted strange blips moving fast across the screen. 21 contacts, low and steady, heading straight for the base. The officer in charge gave the order to sound the alarm. Sirens ripped through the darkness. Lights snapped on across the compound. Soldiers stumbled out of their bunks, grabbing gear and rushing to assigned stations. In seconds, the base shifted from rest to full combat alert. The first wave of drones was already closing in. Flying at low altitude, they hugged the terrain to avoid detection. Each drone carried a small explosive payload, but against fuel storage tanks that was more than enough. The defense system sprang to life. Serum guns roared into the night, firing streams of glowing rounds into the sky. Patriot batteries tracked targets, preparing to launch interceptors. But there were too many. The incoming swarm forced split-second decisions. Commanders had to choose which drones to engage and which ones to risk letting through. The first drone slammed into the outer perimeter. The explosion tore open a section of fencing and shredded a security vehicle nearby. The shockwave rattled windows across the base. Fire crews were already scrambling, rushing to the scene. Moments later, 3 more drones dove straight at the fuel depot. One was destroyed midair by a SRAM burst, but the other 2 hit their marks. The impact triggered a massive fireball. A column of fire shot upward, turning the night sky red. The heat was so intense that metal warped and concrete cracked. Inside the base, chaos spread. Soldiers shouted over radios. Command posts tried to sort fact from rumor. Was this the main attack, or just the beginning? Could more missiles be inbound behind the drones? The fear was real. The burning fuel depot lit up the desert like daylight, creating the perfect beacon for further strikes. Pilots were scrambled. U.S. fighter jets roared off the runway, engines screaming into the night sky. Their mission was not to attack Iran directly, but to sweep for other threats and secure the airspace. Meanwhile, ground crews rushed to protect other storage tanks. Fire suppression systems activated, spraying foam across the depot, but the flames from the first hit spread quickly. Every minute that passed risked another tank going up. The second wave of drones hit next. Some targeted radar installations, hoping to blind the base. Others aimed for housing barracks and command centers. Explosions echoed across the compound. Shrapnel flew in all directions. A drone crashed near the communications hub, cutting off parts of the internal network. Officers had to rely on backup radios and runners to move orders. In the confusion, every second counted. Amid the chaos, acts of courage stood out. Fire crews worked within feet of exploding fuel tanks, trying to stop flames from spreading. Medics rushed into open areas to treat the wounded. Security teams fought back with rifles and heavy machine guns, shooting at drones that buzzed just above ground level. For many, this was the first time facing a drone swarm in real combat. The training was there, but the fear was real. Despite the defenses, at least half the drones made it through. Each one caused more damage. By the time the attack was over, parts of the base looked like a war zone. Smoke billowed in black plumes, visible for miles. Fuel tanks burned like giant torches. Vehicles were destroyed. Several aircraft on the ground were damaged by shrapnel and debris. Casualty numbers were still unclear, but early reports said multiple personnel had been killed or injured. The strike lasted less than 15 minutes. From the first radar detection to the final explosion, the entire attack was over in less time than a coffee break, but the impact was massive. The U.S. base had suffered one of the most significant direct strikes in years. The damage to the fuel depot alone meant flight operations were limited. Fire crews worked through the night to contain the flames, and engineers raced to secure what was left. For the men and women on the ground, those 15 minutes felt like an eternity. The sound of explosions, the roar of defenses, and the smell of burning fuel stayed in the air long after the last drone had crashed. Soldiers knew they had survived something historic and something that might not be the last. The strike showed a terrifying reality. 21 drones, costing a fraction of traditional weapons, had managed to bypass defenses and hit a key U.S. installation. The attack proved that even the most fortified bases were vulnerable to this new form of warfare. For the U.S. Navy and Air Force, the question now was simple: how do you fight back against an enemy that can strike with such speed, surprise, and precision? The night of 4:15 a.m. would not be forgotten. It was not just a drone attack. It was a warning of what modern war had become. And for Washington, the clock was already ticking on how to respond. To understand the full weight of what happened at 4:15 a.m., we need to break down the weapons used, the defenses in place, and the vulnerabilities exposed. Modern warfare is no longer just about tanks, jets, and missiles. It is about cost, speed, and technology. The 21 drones that hit the U.S. base were not futuristic machines out of science fiction. They were relatively cheap, simple, and effective. That is what makes them so dangerous. The drones Iran most likely used were Shahed 136 units, sometimes called kamikaze drones. These are loitering munitions, which means they can fly long distances, circle a target, and then dive in for a strike. Each drone carries an explosive warhead weighing around 40 kilograms, or about 90 pounds. So that may not seem like much compared to a cruise missile, but against fuel tanks or aircraft, it is more than enough to cause a chain reaction of destruction. What makes the Shahed 136 even more effective is its cost. The drones are also hard to detect. They fly low to the ground, often below radar coverage. They use small engines that make less noise and produce little heat, which makes them harder to pick up on infrared sensors. By launching them in swarms, Iran increases the chance that at least some of them will make it through. No defense system in the world can stop every target when dozens arrive at once. The idea is simple: overwhelm the shield with too many arrows. The way the attack was carried out points to careful planning. The drones likely launched from mobile platforms such as trucks or trailers, somewhere in western Iran or possibly from proxy forces in Iraq. Launching from multiple directions makes it even harder for defenses to concentrate fire. Military experts call this a saturation strike. It spreads defenses thin and forces commanders to prioritize targets in seconds, often with incomplete information. The U.S. base had several layers of defense: CRAM, or counter-rocket, artillery and mortar systems, are rapid-fire guns designed to shoot incoming threats out of the air with streams of 20mm rounds. They are effective, but their range is short, and against a swarm, they can be overwhelmed. The base also had Patriot missile batteries, which are powerful against aircraft and ballistic missiles, but less efficient against small drones. Patriots are designed to stop threats moving at high speed and altitude. Against slow, low, and small drones, they are often overkill. Electronic warfare was another tool available. U.S. military has systems that can jam GPS signals or disrupt communication links between drones and their operators. But the Shahed 136 is not fully dependent on remote control. It can use pre-programmed coordinates to guide itself to a target, meaning jamming does not always work. Even if communication is cut, the drone may still hit its mark if the target is fixed, like a fuel depot. This brings us to the choice of target. Fuel depots are both essential and vulnerable. Unlike hardened bunkers or underground silos, fuel tanks are exposed. They are large, thin-walled, and filled with flammable liquid. A single explosion can trigger a domino effect, setting off nearby tanks and creating massive secondary blasts. In this case, that is exactly what happened. The first drones ignited fires that quickly spread across the depot, creating chaos. The incident highlights a critical weakness in modern bases. Defenses are built to stop missiles, jets, or ground assaults, but drones exploit the blind spots. They cost less, require fewer resources, and create more confusion. For the U.S., this means that every exposed asset, fuel tanks, parked aircraft, supply convoys, becomes a potential weak point. Protecting everything is impossible. Military planners now face a hard question. How do you counter swarms of cheap drones without spending millions every time? Some new ideas are being tested. Lasers, for example, can shoot drones down at the speed of light for just a few dollars per shot. Microwave systems can fry their circuits in mid-air. But most of these technologies are still in development. On that night at 4:15 a.m., they were not available. The base had to rely on traditional systems, and those were not enough. The strike also raised the possibility of electronic warfare on Iran's side. Some reports suggested that U.S. communications were disrupted during the attack. If Iran used jamming or cyber interference, it means they were combining drones with digital warfare, making the strike even harder to counter. This would represent an escalation, showing Iran's ability to fight not just with hardware, but with software and signals. In the end, the technical story of the attack is clear. 21 drones, simple but effective, overwhelmed defenses designed for bigger threats. They struck a soft target with devastating effect. They cost almost nothing compared to the damage they caused. And they exposed the reality that even the most powerful military on Earth is not fully prepared for the age of drone warfare. The technical lessons were sharp. Cheap weapons can cripple expensive bases. Swarms can bypass layered defenses. Fuel and logistics remain exposed. And most importantly, the balance of power in modern war is shifting not through massive fleets or armies, but through the quiet buzz of small machines in the night sky. When the last drone hit and the fires raged, the U.S. base entered survival mode. Fire crews battled the inferno for hours, pouring foam and water over the blazing fuel depot. The heat was so intense that fire trucks could not get too close. Some firefighters worked with masks melting on their faces. By dawn, much of the depot was destroyed. At least 6 fuel tanks were gone, reduced to twisted metal shells. Black smoke rose into the sky, visible for miles. The human cost was real. Early reports confirmed several U.S. personnel killed in the attack, security guards near the perimeter, firefighters caught in secondary explosions, and mechanics working close to the depot. Dozens more were injured, from burns to shrapnel wounds. Medics worked through the night, setting up emergency triage centers. For the men and women stationed there, it was a reminder that war could reach them even in what seemed like safe territory. Operationally, the damage was severe. The base's ability to launch air sorties was cut in half. With large amounts of fuel destroyed, jets had to be resupplied from secondary depots, slowing response times. Several aircraft were grounded after being damaged by shrapnel and debris. U.S. commanders had to reroute supply chains and call for urgent shipments of replacement fuel. For hours, operations were on hold. In military terms, the base had been temporarily crippled, but the bigger outcome was strategic. Washington had to decide how to respond. Was this a direct Iranian strike, or could it be blamed on one of Tehran's proxy militias? Iran, as expected, denied involvement. State media said the drones were launched by independent resistance groups in the region. But the U.S. military knew the technology bore Iran's fingerprint. The Shahed 136 drones were unmistakable. The question was whether the U.S. would retaliate openly against Iran or strike proxy forces instead. Allies across the region watched closely. Gulf states with their own U.S. bases worried they could be next. Israel, already locked in its own shadow war with Iran, pressed Washington to hit back hard. European allies urged restraint, warning that escalation could set the region on fire. Inside the Pentagon, debates raged. A direct strike on Iran risked full-scale war. Weak response risked inviting more attacks. The incident also sent a signal to U.S. rivals worldwide. Russia and China were watching. If a regional power like Iran could cripple a U.S. base with cheap drones, what did that mean for future conflicts? It exposed vulnerabilities that great powers could study and exploit. By the next day, emergency repairs were underway. Engineers worked to rebuild pipelines, restore power, and secure surviving tanks. Security was tightened across all U.S. installations in the Middle East. More air defenses were rushed in. Commanders raised alert levels, expecting the possibility of follow-up strikes. The base would recover, but the message was clear. Even the most advanced forces could be humbled by 21 drones in the night. The outcome was not just destruction, it was a shift in the balance of perception. Iran had shown it could land a blow without sparking total war. The U.S. had been forced to absorb it. And for every soldier who lived through that night, the memory of fire and chaos at 4:15 a.m. would not fade. The strike at 4:15 a.m. was more than just an attack on a U.S. fuel depot. It was a warning about the future of warfare. For decades, The United States has relied on overwhelming firepower, advanced aircraft, and global logistics to maintain control. But on that night, 21 cheap drones challenged that dominance. They proved that a weapon costing tens of thousands could cripple assets worth billions. The lesson was sharp. Soft targets can no longer be assumed safe. Fuel depots, radar stations, runways, and supply chains are as important as fighter jets or missile systems. They are the backbone of modern war. If you cut the fuel, you ground the planes. If you disrupt supply, you weaken the mission. Iran understood this, and they exploited it with simple low-cost weapons. For us commanders, the question now is not just about retaliation, it is about adaptation. How do you defend against swarms? How do you fight an enemy that hides behind proxies, launches cheap drones, and denies responsibility? The traditional playbook of massive retaliation and large-scale strikes does not always fit this new type of war. Future solutions may lie in new technologies. Directed energy weapons like high-powered lasers could offer near-instant defense against drones at a fraction of the cost of missiles. Microwave systems may disable swarms before they reach their target. Driven radars could improve detection at low altitudes. These ideas are being tested, but they are not ready everywhere, not yet. Till then, U.S. bases remain vulnerable. Geopolitically, the attack sent ripples far beyond the desert. Allies wondered if America